Lyra and Kaelin. The whisper of shadows. Darkness has a flavor. Lyra Duskmere discovered this truth centuries ago. The metallic tang on her tongue when summoning shadows. That copper taste reminiscent of ancient blood spilled in forgotten rituals. The kind of taste that never quite leaves your mouth, no matter how many nights pass. As she moved through the obsidian corridors of the Nightfall Palace, the 5 fire torches flickered in her wake, not from any spell she cast, but from pure instinct. The flames feared her. Perhaps they were wise to do so. Her fingers trailed along the black walls, leaving a shimmer of violet deep shadow in their wake, a signature as distinctive as blood. In the night court, where every fire was woven from darkness and secrets, Lyra was the darkest of them all. Nearly. You're late. The voice emerged from shadow itself. Literally. Kaelin Nightborn pulled himself from the darkness like a god being born from the void, his massive frame solidifying from mist into flesh and bone and pure, terrible power. The warlord of the Night Court was a master of camouflage in darkness, a skill that made him invaluable and insufferable in equal measure. Lyra didn't slow her pace. Her hand remained on the wall, tracing patterns of luminescent shadow that pulsed with her heartbeat. The queen detained me. Matters of diplomacy. Her voice was low, controlled, edged with the sarcasm that characterized everything she said. Concepts I'm sure you struggle with. Diplomacy requires finesse. Kaelin's eyes changed. First the warm amber of his natural form, then bleeding into a deep crimson that ignited like flame in a fireplace. He was too tall, too broad, too full of barely contained violence. His black wings, massive, spanning the width of the corridor, trembled against his back, their tips scraping stone. Finesse, he repeated, the word dripping with disdain. Is that what you call it when you whisper? Because whispers cut deeper than screams? Quote. Lyra finally stopped walking. She turned to face him fully. And even from 3 feet away, she could feel the heat radiating from his body. The warmth of magic barely contained. The scent of smoke and copper and something else. Something that made her pulse quicken in ways she refused to examine. Her eyes met his. She forced her own eyes to remain there, pale blue, steady and cold as winter water. If you're here to posture about the Dayburn Prince again. Quote. Theron. Kaelin spat the name like poison. Say his name. Don't hide behind titles like a coward. The insult hung between them, sharp and deliberate. Lyra's hand clenched against the wall, and the shadows rippled, a physical manifestation of her anger that she immediately forced back under control. One of the first rules of the Night Court. Never show your power in anger. Show it in perfect, terrifying composure. Theron, she repeated, her voice calm as death itself, is precisely why you should not be roaming these halls tonight. The queen specifically. Quote. The queen isn't here. Kaelin stepped closer, his wings folding slightly to allow him passage in the narrow corridor. With each step, the temperature dropped. Aislinn is in her throne room, drowning in diplomacy with representatives from the Spring Court. Which means the palace is mine. Which means I can do whatever, or whoever, I wish. The implication hung in the air between them like poison gas. Lyra's breath caught, though she would never admit it. This was how it always was with Kaelin. This strange dance between them. This push and pull of power and danger and something neither of them dared name. You can't, she said simply. The queen's orders, quote, are not your responsibility to enforce. Kaelin closed the distance between them until only inches separated his chest from hers. Even now, with her back against the wall and him towering above her, Lyra refused to look away. That's Aislinn's burden. You're merely her shadow. Lyra. A whisper. A ghost. The words were meant to sting. And they did. Not because they were untrue, but because they were spoken by the one person whose opinion she'd never admit to caring about. Better a shadow than a monster, she said quietly. At least I know what I am. For a moment, just a fraction of a second, something flickered across Kaelin's face. Hurt. Raw. Genuine hurt. Quickly buried beneath layers of rage and pride. His eyes flashed. Brighter. The red deepening to almost black. Is that what Aislinn calls me? Her loyal monster? Her guard dog? Quote. No. Lyra's voice softened despite her intention to remain cold. That's what you call yourself. The Queen sees you as a weapon. I see you as a man destroying himself from the inside out. Kaelin's wings snapped fully open, their span creating a canopy of absolute darkness that swallowed the torchlight entirely. For a moment, they were suspended in complete night. No light, no shadows to hide in. Just pure void. Lyra could feel her own magic instinctively, reaching toward his, seeking anchor in the chaos. Then the light returned. The torches flared brighter than before. And Kaelin was gone. Not vanished, but retreated, deeper into the palace, toward the war chambers where he spent most of his nights, planning strategies for a war that the Queen had not yet approved. Lyra remained pressed against the wall, her heart pounding against her ribs. Her hand was still glowing with shadow light, and she finally released it, watching the violet fade back to darkness. She told herself it was anger that made her pulse race. She was an excellent liar. The throne room of the Night Court was a masterpiece of shadow and starlight. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, lost in darkness that might have been stone or might have been the night sky itself. There was no way to tell where the palace ended and the eternal night began. Constellations of fire created stars drifted like fallen diamonds, casting cold blue light across everything they touched. Aislinn sat upon her throne of twisted silver and black iron, a crown of thorns upon her head, her beauty as lethal as a knife. Her eyes, those violets that shifted to mercury silver, tracked the movements of the spring court representatives with the precision of a predator assessing prey. Lyra stood 3 paces behind the throne. To the left, where she always stood, the Queen's shadow, the Queen's silence, the Queen's truth speaker, when truth needed to be told, without Aislinn having to soil her royal mouth with it. Your Majesty, the lead representative said. A fine man with hair like sunlight and eyes the color of new grass. Everything about him screamed Dayburn. Which meant everything about him screamed threat to the Night Court. We come with an offer of peace. The eternal conflict between our courts has cost both our peoples dearly. Surely we can negotiate terms. Quote, terms. Aislinn's voice was liquid darkness, each syllable dripping with disdain. She leaned forward slightly, and her throne, the physical manifestation of her power, shrank with her, bringing her closer to the representative. You offer me terms as though we are merchants, haggling over trade goods, as though our centuries-long hatred can be bartered away for what? Gold? Territory? The promise of your prince's hand in marriage? Quote, the representative's jaw tightened. Behind him, 2 other spring court fies shifted uncomfortably. They felt it too. The way Aislinn's mere presence was like pressure in their chests, making it hard to breathe. The Prince Theron, the representative continued carefully, has expressed his willingness to broker peace. He arrives in 3 days. Quote, 3 days. Aislinn stood, and the throne rose with her, elevating her above them. Her wings. Lyra had seen them unfold perhaps 5 times in her 3 centuries of service. Remained folded, but she sensed them trembling with barely restrained power. You give me 3 days to prepare for the arrival of the man who once bedded our queen in the eyes of both courts and then abandoned her like a coward when she showed his true nature. Quote, the temperature in the throne room plummeted. Frost crept across the silver floor like living things. Lyra's expression didn't change, but internally, she calculated. This was new information. Or rather, this was old information finally being spoken aloud. The entire Night Court knew about Aislin's history with Theron, but it was never discussed openly, never acknowledged, in front of outsiders. That Aislinn chose to reveal it now, to weaponize her own heartbreak. It meant something had shifted. Theron returns to offer peace, Aislinn continued, her voice quiet now, far more dangerous than when she had been loud. But what he truly offers is redemption for himself. He comes hoping that I will forgive him, that I will forget the humiliation, that, perhaps we might reconcile. She laughed, a sound like breaking glass in a cathedral. Take your prince's offer of peace back to the Dayburn court, Aislinn commanded. Tell them that the Night Court will not bow to false hope. Tell them that when Theron arrives, he will be given the hospitality due to any royal guest, and tell them that if he thinks to use this visit to manipulate me, to play at rekindling old flames, I will personally ensure that the only light he ever sees again is the moment before I extinguish it. The Spring Court representatives bowed and backed away, moving toward the exit with the careful steps of people leaving a predator's lair. Lyra watched them go, noting the fear in their posture, the way they couldn't stop glancing at Aislinn even as they retreated. When the doors, massive slabs of obsidian, closed behind them, Aislinn's composure cracked, just slightly. Her hand gripped the arm of her throne, and her knuckles turned white. Lyra took a step forward. My queen? Quote. Aislinn's eyes, still that dangerous silver violet, turned to her. For a moment, there was no royal mask, just a woman who had been betrayed 2 centuries ago and had spent every day since building walls so high that even she couldn't remember what love felt like. Kaelin, Aislinn said quietly. Where is he? Quote. The ward chambers. He was. Lyra paused, choosing her words carefully. He was displeased about the Dayburn prince's arrival. Of course he was. Aislinn turned back to her throne, sinking into it like a stone into water. Kaelin wants to go to war with the Dayburn court. He has wanted it for decades. He sees Theron as an opportunity to finally convince me. And will you? Lyra asked, though she already knew the answer. Aislinn was many things. Wounded, angry, fierce. But she was not reckless. Not yet. No. Aislinn closed her eyes. Because going to war would be reckless. And recklessness is a luxury I cannot afford. The Spring Court's offer of peace is genuine, I think, but Theron's arrival complicates matters. With him here, tensions will rise. Kaelin will push harder for war. The other lords will be divided. She opened her eyes and looked directly at Lyra. I need you, she said simply, to keep Kaelin contained. He respects you more than he respects anyone in this court except me. Use that. Keep him from starting something that I cannot finish. Lyra felt something shift in her chest. Something that might have been responsibility. Or might have been the first flutter of a trap closing around her. I will do what I can. My queen, she said quietly. I know you will. Aislinn smiled. And it was sad. That's why you're my shadow. Lyra. Because you always do what must be done. No matter the cost. The words lingered as Lyra bowed and backed away from the throne. She knew them for what they were. Not a compliment, but a curse. A quiet acknowledgement that Lyra would sacrifice herself, her happiness, her desires, her very soul, for the queen who had given her purpose. She had accepted that bargain long ago. She didn't expect it to be tested quite so soon. The war chambers were located deep beneath the Nightfall Palace. In the older sections, where the stone itself seemed to pulse with ancient magic, the walls were covered in maps, not just of the Night Court's territory, but of every neighboring realm, trade routes, battle strategies, weak points in enemy defenses. The chambers were Kaelin's domain, a place where his violent thoughts could be mapped into strategy, where his anger could be given shape and form. Lyra found him exactly where she expected, bent over a map of the border regions between the Night Court and the Dayburn territories, his massive hands pressing into the stone table, as though he could reshape the land through sheer will. "The Queen has extended a welcome to Theron," Lyra said without preamble. It was easier that way. No pretense. No dancing around the subject. "He arrives in 3 days. Kaelin's hands clenched. Stone cracked beneath his fingers. Long fissures spreading like a spider web. "She's making a mistake. Perhaps." Lyra moved closer, her eyes scanning the maps. "But it's her mistake to make." "No." Kaelin finally looked at her, and his eyes were still that terrible red, the color they turned when he was considering violence. "It's a mistake that will cost the Night Court dearly. Theron doesn't come for peace. He comes for her. He comes to remind her of what they had, what she lost when she exiled him. And Aislinn." He spat the Queen's name like a curse. "Aislinn is too much of a romantic to resist." "The Queen is many things," Lyra said coldly. "But a fool is not one of them. She will not fall for whatever manipulation Theron attempts." "You're right." Kaelin turned fully to face her now, and there was something in his expression that made Lyra's breath catch. "But she will struggle. And while she struggles, the Night Court will be vulnerable. The other lords will see weakness. The Spring Court will press their advantage. Within a month, we'll be on the brink of civil war." He was right, Lyra realized. He often was. Beneath the rage and posturing, Kaelin was a natural strategist. A pity that his strategies were usually born of violence rather than finesse. "What do you propose?" she asked, though she already suspected she knew. "War. Now. Before they're prepared. Strike the Dayburn Court before Theron can solidify their alliance with the Spring Court. We have the advantage. They don't expect us to move so quickly." Quote, "And when the Queen discovers that you've started a war without her permission." Quote, Kaelin smiled, and it was the smile of a predator who had just spotted wounded prey. "She won't." The implication was clear. He intended to act in secret, to present Aislinn with a fait accompli. By the time she discovered what he'd done, war would be unavoidable. Kaelin would have acted. The Dayburn Court would have retaliated. And Aislinn would have no choice but to commit fully to the conflict. It was brilliant. It was treacherous. It would destroy everything the Queen had worked to build. "No," Lyra said flatly. "No?" Kaelin's eyes widened slightly, as though he couldn't quite believe he'd heard correctly. "You're refusing me?" Quote, "I'm informing you that you will not do this." Lyra stepped closer, and now her own eyes began to glow, not red like his, but a soft violet that pulsed with her heartbeat. "The Queen has commanded that the peace be maintained. You will maintain it." "Commanded through you? Or did she tell you herself?" Quote, "It was a trap, and Lyra walked right into it. She told me herself. She told you to keep me contained." Kaelin's laugh was bitter. "I heard her. You know, my hearing is as sharp as a blade. She said I respect you. Did you know that, Lyra? Did you know that the only reason the Queen thinks you can control me is because I respect you?" Quote, Lyra's breath caught. She hadn't known he'd heard. Hadn't known he was capable of listening to private conversations between the queen and her most trusted shadow. What I feel is irrelevant, she said. But her voice wavered slightly. Is it? Kaelin moved closer. And now the heat from his body was almost unbearable. Is it really irrelevant, Lyra? Because from where I'm standing, your feelings for me seem to be the only thing that might prevent me from doing exactly what I intend to do. The words hung between them like a blade suspended in midair. Lyra forced herself to speak, to maintain some semblance of control. I will not be manipulated. Not by you. Not for anyone. No, Kaelin agreed softly. You won't be manipulated, but you might be convinced. Might be shown a truth you've been avoiding. He reached out, and his hand, warm, calloused, bearing the marks of centuries of warfare, touched her face. His fingers traced her jawline with surprising gentleness, a stark contrast to the violence that usually emanated from him. Theron's arrival changes everything, he whispered. In 3 days, the queen will be divided between her duty and her heart. In 3 days, the night court will be vulnerable. In 3 days, everything we've built will be threatened. And your solution is to burn it all down yourself? Lyra pulled away from his touch. Though it took all her strength to become the very threat you claim to be protecting us from? Quote, my solution, Kaelin said, his hand falling back to his side, is to ensure that the queen is not forced to choose between her crown and her heart. I'm trying to protect her, Lyra. I'm trying to protect all of us. For a moment, just a moment, Lyra almost believed him. Then she saw the truth beneath the words. Kaelin was in love with Aislinn. Had been for centuries. And he couldn't stand the thought of the queen choosing someone else. Even temporarily. Even for the sake of diplomacy. The realization struck Lyra like a physical blow. Stay here, she commanded. And she used every ounce of authority in her voice. Do not leave these chambers without my permission. Do not contact the generals. Do not send messages to any of the border lords. Understand me, Kaelin. I will know if you defy me. Will you? He asked softly. Will you come down here every night to check on me? Every night, just the two of us in the darkness? Quote, it was a challenge and an invitation wrapped into one. Lyra turned and left without answering. But as she climbed the stone stairs back toward the main palace, she could feel his eyes on her, burning like 2 points of red light in the darkness. Lyra visited the war chambers 3 times over the next 3 days. The first time, Kaelin was exactly where she'd left him, bent over maps and strategy papers, his massive frame folded over the stone table. He didn't look up when she entered, but she could sense the shift in his attention, the way his power reached toward her like a physical thing. I haven't moved, he said quietly. See? Containment achieved. You can report to the queen that her guard dog is obedient. Lyra didn't respond to the bait. Instead, she remained silent, simply observing him. In the torchlight of the war chambers, Kaelin looked almost vulnerable, his dark hair falling into his face, the red in his eyes dimmed to something closer to amber. Almost. She could see the man beneath the warrior. Almost. Why do you love her? Lyra asked suddenly. Kaelin finally looked up, and his eyes returned to their full crimson intensity. Because she's the only person in this entire court who has never asked me to be anything less than what I am, he said. Everyone else wants the warlord of the night court. Aislinn wants Kaelin, the man, the monster, both at once. And yet she will never love you the way you love her, Lyra said. Not unkindly. She cannot. Her heart was broken by Theron. And it's fragile in a way that frightens her. When he arrives, she will be faced with a choice. Retreat further into herself, or risk being hurt again. Either way. There's no space for you in that equation. Kaelin was quiet for a long moment. Then help me make space, he said finally. Help me make myself indispensable. Help me convince her that I'm the better choice. By starting a war? Lyra shook her head. No, that's not love, Kaelin. That's obsession. She left before he could respond, her heart heavier than it had been when she entered. Aislinn sat in her private chambers, and Lyra brought her tea infused with night flowers. A calming brew that helped the queen sleep. The queen's chambers were dimly lit only by starlight filtering through windows that opened onto nothing but sky, as though the palace floated above the world itself. Kaelin is planning something, Aislinn said without preamble. She sipped her tea and stared out the window. I can feel it. There's an electricity in the palace. A restlessness. He's plotting. Yes, Lyra admitted. He wants to start a war with the Dayburn court before Theron arrives. Of course he does. Aislinn's laugh was bitter. My warlord. Always so transparent in his violence. He thinks that if we're at war, I won't be tempted by Theron's arrival. That I'll be too focused on survival to remember heartbreak. Will you? Lyra asked carefully. Will you remember heartbreak? Or will you be tempted by Theron? Quote, I don't know, Aislinn said quietly. That's what frightens me. Lyra, I don't know what I'll feel when I see him again. 2 centuries ago, I loved him with the kind of intensity that fades only when it's replaced by hatred. But hatred is also fading, worn thin by time. All that's left is uncertainty. And I hate uncertainty more than I hate anything. Lyra had no answer to that. Instead, she sat in silence beside her queen, as she had for centuries, carrying the weight of words that were never spoken aloud. They arrived in the early morning, when the night was just beginning to fade at the edges. The Dayburn princes came with a full entourage, warriors in armor that reflected the sunrise, courtiers in clothing of whites and golds that seemed to mock the darkness of the night court, and Theron. Lyra stood at the gates of the Nightfall Palace as the prince rode through on a horse that shone like polished gold. Theron was beautiful in the way of dangerous things. His hair was pale as starlight, his eyes a burning amber, his presence a physical force that made the very air seem brighter. She could understand why Aislinn had loved him. She could also understand why his presence was like a blade between the queen's ribs. Lyra's eyes found Kaelin almost immediately. He stood on the highest turret of the palace, his massive form silhouetted against the lightning sky. His wings were spread, not in welcome, but in warning. His eyes burned crimson even from a distance. In 3 days of containment, Lyra had prevented a war. But she hadn't prevented the feeling in the air now. That sense of standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing that the wind was about to change, and there was nothing to be done but wait for the fall. The dining hall of the night court was a cathedral of darkness lit by floating crystals of fire. The table was impossibly long, crafted from a single piece of obsidian that had been polished to mirror brightness. It reflected everything and revealed nothing. A perfect metaphor for the politics of the night court itself. Aislinn sat at the head of the table, her throne-like chair elevated above the others. She wore black silk that seemed to absorb light, and her crown of thorns caught the fire and threw it back in 1,000 fractured directions. Her beauty was a weapon, as always, but tonight it was tempered with something sharper, a brittleness that suggested the slightest pressure would shatter her. Theron sat to her right. As befitted a royal guest, he wore white and gold, a visual challenge to the darkness around him. He did not look at Aislinn, though Lyra could sense how intensely he was aware of her presence. The way his entire body oriented toward her like a flower turning toward sun. Kaelin sat to Aislinn's left, his crimson eyes fixed on Theron with an intensity that suggested murder. His hands were clenched into fists, and the air around him was hot, enough to make wineglasses sweat with condensation. Lyra stood in the shadows behind Aislin's chair, her usual place. From here, she could see everything. The way Theron's jaw tightened whenever Aislinn spoke. The way Kaelin's wings trembled with barely restrained violence. The way the Queen's fingers gripped the armrest of her chair hard enough to draw blood. The spring crops have been bountiful, Theron said, attempting conversation with the polite tone of someone trying to keep a candle lit in a hurricane. The Dayburn territories have benefited greatly from the favorable weather. Perhaps, quote, perhaps the Night Court might benefit from alliance with prosperity? Aislinn finished, her voice layered with meaning, a suggestion born of old sentiment. Your Highness? Or a genuine diplomatic offering? Quote, both, Theron said quietly. I would be foolish to pretend that I don't remember you, Aislinn, that I don't feel the weight of what was between us. But I'm also here because my father believes that lasting peace is possible, that the hatred between our courts is a choice we can unmake. A choice, Kaelin spat, as though hatred requires an active will, as though it's not simply the natural state of things. The natural state? Theron finally looked at Kaelin, and something flickered across his face. Recognition, perhaps, of a kindred spirit. Two men destroyed by love for the same woman. I'd argue the natural state is connection, loyalty, the bonds that tie a court together, which you broke when you. Kaelin stood, his chair scraping backward with a sound like stone screaming. Kaelin. Aislinn's voice was soft, but it carried the full weight of her authority as queen. You will sit. You will finish your meal. You will conduct yourself with the dignity expected of the warlord of the Night Court. The entire hall held its breath. Kaelin slowly sat back down, but his eyes remained fixed on Theron, and Lyra could see the calculation happening behind those crimson depths. He was planning something. After 3 days of containment, after promising to maintain peace, he was still plotting. Lyra's hand moved to the shadows at the edge of the hall, preparing to act if necessary. But Theron spoke first. Your Majesty, he said, addressing Aislinn directly, I owe you an apology. I was young and foolish. When you accused me of infidelity, I responded with anger instead of understanding. I should have fought harder to make you believe me. I should have refused to leave. I should have. He paused, and genuine emotion cracked his careful composure. I should have done 1,000 things differently. But you didn't, Aislinn said, and her voice was hollow. You left. You stayed away for centuries. You married other women. You built a new life that didn't include me. I did those things because I had to, Theron said. Because loving you was destroying me. And I thought time would make it better. That eventually you would forget about me. That you would find someone who could give you what I couldn't. His eyes briefly found Kaelin, and the message was clear. Another person had stepped in. Another person had tried to fill the void. But you came back, Kaelin said, and his voice was cold as winter. You came back. Because love doesn't fade. Because no matter how much time passes, some obsessions never die. You came back to try to claim her again. Yes, Theron said simply. I came back because I still love her. Because I believe I always will. But I'm not here to force her to choose me. I'm here to tell her the truth. I was too young and too angry to tell her 2 centuries ago. That the person I loved, the woman I betrayed in my own way by leaving, deserves to know that it wasn't her fault. That the misunderstanding between us was the cruelest kind of coincidence. And I've spent every day since regretting that I didn't fight harder to make her understand. Aislinn's hand had moved to cover her mouth. though whether from shock or grief, Lyra couldn't determine. This changes nothing, Kaelin said quietly. Because I will never let you hurt her again. I will never permit the Dayburn court to make threats under the guise of peace. And I will certainly never allow you to sit at this table and pretend that your pretty words can undo centuries of damage. He stood again, but this time no one commanded him to sit. I'm done, he announced. I'm done with this dinner. I'm done with this pretense of peace. The queen is wise to be cautious. But she is not wise to trust not you. Not the spring court. Not anyone. The only loyalty that matters in this world is the loyalty we give ourselves. And with that, Kaelin walked away from the table, his massive form moving through the dining hall like a thunderstorm passing over a village. His wings unfurled as he approached the doors, and they seemed to darken the very light itself as he departed. In the silence that followed, Lyra could hear the sound of her own heartbeat. Theron returned his attention to his food. Though he ate nothing, Aislinn stared at the place where Kaelin had sat, as though her warlord might materialize from the shadows if she wished hard enough. And Lyra remained in her place, a shadow in the shadows, knowing that the dinner was merely the first domino in a cascade that would bring the entire night court crashing down. Around them, Lyra found Kaelin on the highest tower of the Nightfall Palace, standing at the very edge, where the stone gave way to a 300-foot drop. His wings were spread, not for flight, but as though he were measuring the distance between himself and the clouds. She approached slowly, her shadow magic deliberately visible so he would hear her coming. Some people were startled by shadows. Kaelin responded to violent light. You're going to throw yourself off, she said flatly. That's the dramatic conclusion you're planning? Quote, would you care? Kaelin didn't turn around. The wind caught his hair, scattering it like black silk against the dawn sky. No, Lyra lied. I would simply have to explain to the queen why her warlord became a stain on the courtyard stones. That made him laugh. A bitter, broken sound. You're as cold as stone, he said. I don't think I've ever met anyone as completely incapable of genuine emotion as you are. I'm capable of enough, Lyra replied. She moved to stand beside him at the edge, though she was careful to keep several feet between them. Anger, duty, responsibility. Those emotions have served me well for 3 centuries. Served you? Kaelin finally looked at her, and his eyes were still crimson, but tired now. The rage had cooled into something more like despair. Or imprisoned you? At what point, Lyra, do you accept that you've sacrificed so much for the queen that you've become nothing more than a function? Not a woman, not even a person, just a mechanism for maintaining order. Better a mechanism than a dog, Lyra said quietly. At least I serve with open eyes. Kaelin flinched as though she'd struck him. Is that how you see me? As a dog? Quote, I see you as a man who loves a woman he cannot have, Lyra said. And for the first time, her voice carried genuine compassion. And instead of accepting that truth, you're destroying yourself trying to force an outcome that will never come to pass. It's pathetic, Kaelin, and it's beneath you. Nothing is beneath me, Kaelin said. I'm a warrior. I'm made for violence, for rage, for the kind of strength that breaks things. Aislinn is the only one who ever asked me to be more, and she did so while loving someone else, while waiting for someone else, while wishing I was someone else. She doesn't love Theron, Lyra said. That's not why she can't love you. Kaelin turned to face her fully. Then why? Quote, Lyra chose her words carefully. Because loving you would require her to give you something she gave to Theron once. And it nearly destroyed her when he left. Aislinn cannot afford vulnerability. Not with someone like you. You have too much power. You could break her completely. And Theron couldn't? Kaelin's laugh was bitter. He already did. He's already broken her into 1,000 pieces. The only difference is that I could put her back together. I could heal her. You could also crush her, Lyra said. Accidentally or otherwise. The Queen knows this. So, she protects herself by refusing to love you. Kaelin stepped back from the edge of the tower. It wasn't surrender. Not quite. But it was something close. He moved to a stone bench positioned nearby and sat heavily, his massive frame seeming somehow smaller in defeat. Then what's the point? He asked the clouds. If I can never have her, if I can never be what she needs, what's the point of continuing? Quote. Lyra sat beside him, leaving appropriate distance between them. The point, she said slowly, is that there are other purposes in life besides romance. Other reasons to continue. Such as, quote, protecting the realm, building something that lasts, finding someone who can love you, without reservation, without fear. Kaelin's head turned to look at her. You don't really believe that, he said. You believe in duty. That's all you've ever believed in. Yes, Lyra admitted. But perhaps that's changing. It was the closest she'd ever come to admitting anything real to him. She watched as surprise flickered across his face, followed immediately by something that might have been hope. Lyra, quote, don't, she said quickly. Don't misinterpret what I'm saying. I'm not offering myself as a replacement for Aislinn. I'm saying that there is merit in continuing to live, even when the people we love cannot love us back. Kaelin was quiet for a long moment. That sounds like a terrible way to exist, he finally said. It is, Lyra agreed. But it's existence nonetheless. And existence, Kaelin, is sometimes enough. The Oracle of the Night Court kept her residence in the deepest chambers of the palace, where even the 5 fire torches struggled to maintain their light. Her name was Morwenna, and she was old. Older than Aislinn, older than Kaelin, older perhaps than the Night Court itself. She could see the future, but only in fragments. She could taste tomorrows on her tongue, like copper and ash, and she very rarely shared her visions with anyone, because knowledge of the future had a way of destroying the people who received it. But when the Queen summoned her, she came. Aislinn sat upon a simple chair in Morwenna's chamber. No throne here, no symbols of power. In the presence of true magic, even queens were diminished. Lyra stood behind Aislinn, as always, and Morwenna watched her with eyes that saw too much. You want to know, Morwenna said, her voice like wind through a crypt. If the Dayburn prince comes with honest intentions, I want to know if allowing his presence will destroy my court, Aislinn corrected. Morwenna laughed, a sound that was itself a prophecy of sorrow. Destruction, she repeated, such a simple word for something so complex. Let me show you what I see. She took Aislinn's hand, and the Queen gasped as the visions flooded through her. Lyra saw it reflected in Aislinn's widening eyes, in the way her pupils dilated with terror and wonder, and recognition. When Morwenna finally released her, Aislinn was trembling. You see, the oracle said, Theron does come with honest intentions. He comes because he still loves you. He comes hoping for redemption. And yes, his coming will destroy your court, but not because of him. Then because of what? Aislinn whispered. Because of the choices that will be made in response to his arrival. Morwenna's sightless eyes turned toward Lyra. There are 3 paths forward. In one, the Queen chooses the Dayburn Prince, and Kaelin, in his despair, leads the Night Court into open war against the Dayburn territories. 1,000 will die. The Night Court will fracture. The entire magical world will be set ablaze. In the second path, Morwenna continued, The queen chooses to maintain peace through diplomacy alone. Kaelin rebels openly, leading a faction of lords who believe the queen is betraying them. Civil war tears the Night Court apart from within. 2,000 will die. The Spring Court will seize the opportunity to conquer our territories. And the third path? Aislinn asked, though from the way her voice shook, she already suspected the answer. In the third path, Morwenna said quietly, the queen chooses love. She allows herself to be vulnerable. Theron and Aislinn reconcile publicly, sending a message to the Dayburn court that the ancient enemies have become allies. Kaelin, unable to bear witness to this, accepts his role as a warrior and channels his rage into defending the combined courts against those who would threaten them. In this path, thousands live. The Night Court survives. But the queen must sacrifice something precious. What? Aislinn demanded. What must I sacrifice? Quote, Morwenna turned her sightless gaze to Lyra. The shadow that stands behind the throne, she said. The woman who has always put duty before desire. In this path, that woman must finally choose for herself. Must choose love, not service. The queen cannot have both. Cannot have her shadow remain by her side while also choosing to be with Theron. The shadow must finally step into the light. Lyra felt the weight of those words settle on her shoulders like a physical thing. That's not a sacrifice, Aislinn said sharply. That's not the queen asking anything of Lyra. That's me asking her to save herself. All sacrifices are selfish, Morwenna said. That's what makes them sacrifices and not simply acts of service. Lyra found Aislinn in her private chambers after the oracle's reading. The queen was standing at her window, looking out at the eternal night beyond the palace walls. She looked smaller somehow, more fragile, as though the weight of the prophecy had physically diminished her. I know what Morwenna said, Lyra began. Do you? Aislinn turned, and her eyes were red from crying. Do you know what it means to be forced to choose between the only two men you've ever loved? Quote, you don't love Kaelin, Lyra said carefully. Don't I? Aislinn's laugh was broken. He's been my rock, my strength, my anchor for centuries. He loves me with a purity that Theron never could. Theron broke my heart. He left me. And yet, her voice caught. And yet when I see him, I feel like that young, foolish woman again. The one who believed in love. The one who thought happiness was possible. Those things are mutually exclusive, Lyra said. You cannot be both the woman who was broken and the woman who refuses to be broken again. Why not? Aislinn turned back to the window. Why can't I be both? Why can't I acknowledge that Theron hurt me while also allowing myself to hope that he might heal me? Quote, because, Lyra said quietly, one requires armor. The other requires you to remove it. You can't do both at the same time. Then tell me what to do, Aislinn said. And her voice was small. Tell me how to choose. Tell me which man to break. Lyra stepped closer. For 3 centuries, she had stood beside this woman, supporting her, holding her up. She had never questioned the queen's decisions, never suggested alternatives, never imposed her own will on the woman who had given her purpose. But Morwenna's words echoed in her mind. The shadow must finally step into the light. Neither, Lyra said finally. You choose yourself. Aislinn turned to look at her, confusion evident in her expression. What does that mean? Quote, it means that you're not required to choose between 2 men. You're not required to sacrifice your happiness for peace or for duty or for anyone else. You have the power to shape your own future. Your Majesty, stop asking other people for permission to live. But the prophecy, quote, the prophecy is a guide, not a mandate, Lyra said. Morwenna showed you 3 paths. But there are infinite variations within those paths. You could choose Theron. You could choose Kaelin. You could choose neither. The only real requirement is that you choose with your eyes open, knowing the consequences of your choice. Aislinn stared at her for a long moment, and Lyra saw something shift in the queen's expression. Not quite acceptance, but perhaps the beginning of it. Why are you telling me this? Aislinn asked. You've never questioned my authority before. You've never suggested that I should think for myself. You've always simply supported whatever I decided. Because, Lyra said, and she felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. I've realized that being a shadow means I can only exist in darkness. And I'm tired of darkness. I'm tired of service without self. I'm tired of being a function instead of a person. It was the most honest thing she'd ever said to the queen. Aislinn reached out and took Lyra's hand. Her skin was warm, and her grip was firm. The grip of a woman who had finally begun to find her own strength. Then stop being my shadow, the queen said quietly. Choose light. Choose yourself. Choose whatever makes you alive. Lyra found Kaelin in the war chambers again. But this time he wasn't alone. 3 of the Night Court's most powerful lords stood around him. Generals of ancient wars. Men who had commanded armies and burned cities. Quote, if we act now, before Theron has time to formalize his alliance with the queen, one of them was saying. Lyra stepped forward, her shadow magic announcing her presence before her body did. Gentlemen, she said coolly. You are dismissed. The lords looked at Kaelin, clearly expecting him to countermand her order. But to their surprise, Kaelin simply nodded, and they filed out, though not without dark looks. When they were gone, Kaelin turned to her with an expression that was part amusement, part resignation. Still trying to contain me? Quote, still trying to prevent you from making choices you'll regret, Lyra corrected. She moved closer. What were you planning, Kaelin? Another coup attempt? Quote, not a coup, Kaelin said quietly. A rebellion. There's a difference. Is there? Lyra moved closer. Because from where I'm standing, they look the same. Both involve you attempting to undermine the queen's authority. Both involve you trying to impose your will on a situation you don't fully understand. I understand it perfectly, Kaelin said. His eyes had faded from their crimson rage to a duller brown, the color of embers rather than flames. Aislinn is going to choose Theron. I can see it coming as clearly as I can see the sunrise. She's already chosen him. She just hasn't admitted it to herself yet. Lyra couldn't argue because he was right. She'd seen the way Aislinn looked at Theron. She'd heard the yearning in the queen's voice when she spoke of the past. Aislinn's heart had already made its choice. Her mind was simply struggling to catch up. And if she does? Lyra asked. If she chooses him, what then? Will you accept it? Quote, no, Kaelin said flatly. I will not accept it. I will rebel. I will tear this court apart. Because if I can't have her, then no one can. Not even the Dayburn prince who broke her heart in the first place. That's the obsession talking, Lyra said. Not the man. They're the same thing, Kaelin replied. I am my obsession. Lyra. I have been for centuries. Aislinn is the only person who makes me feel like I'm something more than a weapon. Without her, I'm just a tool that's outlived its usefulness. Lyra moved until she was directly in front of him. She was so much smaller than he was. So much less powerful. And yet in this moment, she felt like the only real thing in the entire palace. What if you didn't have to choose? She said quietly. What if there was another option? Another person who could make you feel like something more than a weapon? Quote, Kaelin's eyes, those terrible, beautiful eyes, focused on her. Are you offering yourself? He asked, and there was hope in his voice. Dangerous hope. The kind that could lead to violence or salvation, depending on the choices made next. I'm offering to try, Lyra said slowly. Not because you're a backup option for when Aislinn is unavailable, but because I'm beginning to think that maybe I'm tired of being a shadow. Maybe I'm ready to be a person. And maybe, she paused, gathering courage from somewhere deep within herself. Maybe you could be that person too. If you're willing to. Stop being a weapon and start being a man. Kaelin's hand came up, and he cupped her face with surprising gentleness. His thumb traced her cheekbone, and Lyra forced herself to remain still. To not pull away. To accept this moment of vulnerability. How? He asked simply. How do I stop being a weapon? Quote, by accepting that you don't control the Queen's choices, Lyra said. By accepting that you can't force her to love you. By accepting that sometimes the people we love will leave us. And we survive anyway. I don't know if I can do that, Kaelin said. But he also said, I'll try. For you. I'll try. It wasn't surrender. It wasn't even agreement. But it was hope. 3 days later, Theron sent a letter. It was delivered to Aislinn in the morning. Sealed with the royal crest of the Dayburn court. The Queen read it in her private chambers with only Lyra present. And with each line, her expression grew darker. When she finished, she handed the letter to Lyra. My dearest Aislinn, it began. I have spent 200 years trying to forget you. And I have failed completely. Every moment away from you was agony. Every choice I made was made in the shadow of the choice to leave you. Now that I'm back, now that I can see you every day, I cannot imagine returning to that darkness. I am therefore proposing something radical. Come away with me. Leave the Night Court. Leave your crown, your throne, your obligations. Come to the Dayburn territories and be happy. That is all I'm asking. Happiness. Is that really too much to give me? Quote, Lyra looked up from the letter. He's asking you to abandon everything, she said quietly. Yes, Aislinn said. Her voice was hollow. He's asking me to become the person I was 200 years ago. The person who believed love was enough. The person who thought happiness mattered more than duty. What will you tell him? Quote, Aislinn stood and walked to her window. Her reflection in the glass was barely visible. Just the outline of a woman against darkness. I don't know, she admitted. Part of me wants to say yes. Part of me wants to throw off this crown and run away with him and pretend that the Night Court can survive without me. But I know better. I know that my people need me. I know that a queen cannot simply abandon her court because of love. She stepped closer to him. And for a moment, her composure cracked, and Lyra saw the genuine pain beneath her royal mask. I do love you, Kaelin, the Queen said. But I love you as my warlord. As my protector. As the man who has stood beside me for centuries. I cannot love you as a romantic partner. Because doing so would require me to abandon everything I am. I would protect you anyway, Kaelin said desperately. You don't have to love me romantically. Just don't ask me to accept that he gestured vaguely at the direction of the guest chambers where Theron was housed. Just don't ask me to watch you with him. And pretend it doesn't destroy me. Then you're free to leave, Aislinn said. And her voice hardened. If you cannot accept my decisions as queen, if you cannot serve me without demanding something in return, then you are released from your oath. You may go, Kaelin, and no one in the Night Court will stop you. But if you stay, if you choose to remain as my warlord, then you must accept that your personal feelings are secondary to my authority. You must accept that I will make choices you disagree with. You must accept that the Night Court's welfare comes before your heart. And if I choose to rebel? Kaelin asked quietly. If I choose to take the Southland's lords and march against you? Quote, Then, Aislinn said, and her eyes returned to their full purple-silver intensity. I will strike you down myself. I will show the Night Court that no one, not even the warlord I love like a brother, is above the laws that hold this court together. The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. Kaelin looked at Lyra, as if searching for some sign that this wasn't real, that there was still a path forward that didn't end in loss. Lyra met his gaze steadily and said nothing. He turned back to Aislinn and, slowly, he knelt, not in chains this time, but in surrender. I accept, he said quietly. I choose the Night Court. I choose duty. I choose to serve you as warlord, without expecting anything in return. It was a beautiful moment of redemption. It was also, Lyra knew, a lie. After Kaelin had left the throne room, returning to his war chambers with the weight of his choice bearing down on his shoulders, Aislinn sank back onto her throne. She looked exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. It was the exhaustion of a person who had spent centuries being responsible for others and had finally realized the cost of that responsibility. Lyra remained with her, standing in her usual place. I've made an enemy, Aislinn said eventually. He'll accept his role. He'll serve me. But he'll never forgive me for choosing myself over him. And one day, when the opportunity arises, he'll betray me. Possibly, Lyra agreed. And yet I had no choice, Aislinn continued. If I had chosen him, I would have betrayed Theron. If I had chosen Theron, I would have betrayed Kaelin. The only path forward was to choose neither, to choose myself, and in doing so, I've lost both of them in different ways. She opened her eyes and looked directly at Lyra. Promise me something, Aislinn said. Anything. Promise me that when the time comes, and it will come, when Kaelin makes his final move, when he tries one last time to take what he believes is his by right, you'll stand beside me, not as my shadow, but as my sister. Promise me that you won't let sentiment interfere with duty. Lyra wanted to refuse, wanted to protect Kaelin from what she knew was coming, wanted to prevent the inevitable betrayal that Aislinn had foreseen. But she was the queen's shadow, and a shadow cannot refuse its source of light. I promise, she said. Lyra found Kaelin on the tower again that night, in the same place where she'd found him days before, when he'd been contemplating throwing himself off the edge. This time, he was simply standing there, looking out at the eternal night. I know you'll betray her, Lyra said without preamble. Eventually, you'll gather your followers, and you'll try one more time to force her to choose you. Do you? Kaelin didn't look at her. Are you claiming the Oracle's gift now? Can you see the future as clearly as Morwena? Quote, I don't need to see the future, Lyra said. I just need to understand men. And I understand you, Kaelin. I understand that accepting your loss was too easy. That you're already planning how to reverse it. You're right, Kaelin said. And he sounded tired. I'm planning. I'm always planning. It's what I do. I take the pieces of broken things and I reassemble them into weapons. I take my own broken heart and I forge it into a blade. He finally turned to look at her, and his eyes were that soft brown color now. The color of embers cooling. But there's one problem with my plans, he continued. And that problem is you. Me? Lyra felt her breath catch. You, Kaelin confirmed. Because every time I think about gathering my forces, every time I think about leading a rebellion against the Queen, I remember you. I remember the way you said you were tired of being a shadow. I remember the way you offered to try to be a person with me, and I ask myself, what kind of man would I be if I betrayed your trust? What kind of man would I be if I forced you to choose between me and the person you've served for 3 centuries? Quote, he stepped closer, And Lyra forced herself to remain still. I think I might hate myself for it, Kaelin said. But I'm going to try. I'm going to try to stop being a weapon. I'm going to try to accept that Aislinn doesn't love me. I'm going to try to be the kind of man you could actually care about. Why? Lyra asked. Why would you do that for someone like me? I'm not worth the sacrifice. Yes, you are, Kaelin said simply. You're the only person in this entire court who has ever looked at me and seen a man rather than a monster. You're the only person who asked me to be better instead of just accepting my violence. You're the only person worth any of this. He reached out again, just as he had days before, and cupped her face between his large hands. Tell me I'm not too late, he whispered. Tell me there's still time for us to become something real. Lyra wanted to surrender to the warmth of his hands, to the possibility of being loved by someone who chose her, wanted to finally step out of the shadows and into the light of a genuine romantic connection. I can't, she said softly. Not yet. Not while the queen still needs me as her shadow. But after this is resolved, after Kaelin accepts his role and Aislinn finds peace with her choices, then perhaps we can try. Kaelin's hands fell away, but not in anger, in acceptance. Then I'll wait, he said. I'll wait for as long as it takes. 3 weeks after Aislinn's confrontation with Kaelin, the queen called for a formal council, not just the Night Court's lords, but representatives from the Spring Court and the Dayburn Court as well. It was unprecedented. Never before had the Night Court opened its throne room to so many outsiders. Lyra stood in her usual place behind the queen's throne, but she could feel the difference in her presence now. It was no longer invisible. It was no longer purely functional. She was becoming a person again, bit by bit, choice by choice. Theron stood to the side of the throne room, alongside the Dayburn Court's contingent. He looked nervous, Lyra noted, as though he wasn't entirely sure why he'd been summoned. Kaelin stood on the other side, with the Night Court's lords. He looked calm. That worried Lyra more than if he'd looked angry. I've brought you all here, Aislinn began, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber, because a matter of great importance requires witnesses. I'm making a choice today that will affect not just the Night Court, but all the magical realms. She descended from her throne with regal grace and moved to stand in the center of the chamber, equidistant from the Dayburn and Night Court representatives. For 2 centuries, she continued, I have been alone in my rule. I have made decisions based on duty and necessity. I have sacrificed my own happiness for the welfare of my people. I believed that a queen could not afford the luxury of love. Her eyes found Theron, and Lyra saw him stiffen, saw hope kindle in his expression. But I have learned, Aislinn said, that a queen who denies her own humanity ultimately denies her people their full humanity as well. A ruler who cannot feel cannot lead with compassion. A woman who will not love cannot ask her people to love their kingdom. She paused, letting the words settle. Therefore, she announced, I am announcing a formal alliance between the Night Court and the Dayburn Court. This alliance will be symbolized by a union, not out of political necessity, but out of genuine choice. Murmurs rippled through the chamber, some approving, some shocked, some angry. I am choosing to be with Theron, Aislinn said clearly. Not as a desperate woman trying to recapture youth, not as a queen making a political calculation, but as a woman who has spent 2 centuries running from love, and I'm tired of running. She turned to face Theron, and when she did, her entire demeanor changed. The royal mask fell away, and what remained was vulnerable, honest, real. I still remember the pain you caused me, she said to him, her voice quiet enough that only those closest could hear. I still remember the humiliation of being cast aside. But I also remember the joy of being loved by you. And I'm choosing to believe that we've both grown enough to do it better this time. Theron moved toward her, and when he reached her, he dropped to one knee. I will spend every day making up for the pain I caused, he said. I will never give you reason to doubt me again. I swear this on my life, on my magic, on my soul. It was beautiful. It was everything Lyra had expected it to be. And it was also the moment when Kaelin's hand clenched into a fist. When his eyes began to shift from brown toward red. When the first crackling of his power began to blacken the stone beneath his feet. No, Kaelin said, his voice low and dangerous. This ends now. He stood, his wings spreading to their full, terrible span. The entire chamber gasped as his power exploded outward. A wave of shadow magic that extinguished every torch and filled the throne room with absolute darkness. You stand here, in front of all these people, and you tell them that you're choosing love over duty, Kaelin said, his voice echoing as though it came from everywhere and nowhere at once. You tell them that it's acceptable to abandon your people for happiness. And you expect me to smile and accept it? Quote, Aislin's own power flared in response, pushing back against the darkness. Starlight erupted from her form, creating a bubble of illumination in the center of the room. Kaelin, she began. No, he said, you don't get to explain yourself. You don't get to justify this. I have served you faithfully. I have loved you completely. I have sacrificed everything for you and your crown. And you repay me by choosing a man who abandoned you. By choosing emotion over loyalty. He raised his hand, and Lyra saw what was about to happen a fraction of a second before it occurred. The Southland's lords, she shouted. Now, quote, the doors to the throne room exploded inward, and soldiers poured through, thousands of them, wearing the insignia of the Southland's rebellion. They filled the chamber, positioning themselves between Kaelin and Aislinn, between the queen and her allies. You brought me armies, Kaelin said to Lyra, and there was hurt in his voice beneath the rage. You knew this was coming, and you prepared for it. You chose the queen over me. No, Lyra said, stepping forward. I chose what was right over what was easy. There's a difference. The battle erupted. It wasn't clean or organized. It was the chaos of the throne room transforming into a war zone in seconds. Shadow magic clashed with starlight. 5 warriors engaged each other in brutal hand-to-hand combat. The beautiful throne room was stained with blood. Lyra moved through the chaos like smoke, her shadow magic protecting the queen and Theron, creating barriers, binding rebels in tendrils of darkness. She was fighting against Kaelin's army, which meant she was fighting against men and women she had trained, had served with, had called friends. It was one of the worst things she'd ever experienced. She found herself facing off against one of the Southland's generals, a large man named Herrick who had once helped her with strategy. I'm sorry, she told him, even as her shadow magic wrapped around him, rendering him unconscious rather than killing him. She was trying to minimize casualties, trying to end this without more blood. But Kaelin had no such compunctions. She saw him move through the chaos with single-minded purpose, his eyes fixed on Aislinn. His power crackled around him, burning away everything in his path. He was magnificent, and terrible and completely lost in his own despair. Lyra intercepted him before he could reach the queen. Kaelin, stop, she commanded, throwing everything she had into her shadow magic, trying to bind him as she had that first time in the corridor. But this time, he broke free. He turned to her, and his eyes were no longer eyes. They were portals to pure rage and heartbreak and madness. I offered you love, he said. I offered you a choice. And you chose her. You chose the queen over me. Yes, Lyra said simply. I did. Because the queen is my responsibility. Because my oath comes before my heart. Because some things are bigger than personal happiness. How noble, Kaelin spat. How self-sacrificing. How completely and utterly selfish of you. Lyra, you claim you're choosing duty. But you're really just choosing safety. You're choosing the comfort of serving someone else rather than taking the risk of being loved. The words stung because they were partially true. Maybe, Lyra admitted, but that doesn't make it wrong. That just makes it human. Kaelin raised his hand to strike, and Lyra braced herself for impact. But the blow never came. Instead, Kaelin simply dropped his hand. His power faded, and the light returned to the throne room. The Southland's soldiers, seeing their leader surrender, began to stand down. The battle, so sudden and violent, was already over. Kaelin looked at Aislinn one last time. The queen was standing in Theron's arms. And she was crying, not from fear or triumph, but from genuine sorrow for the man she couldn't love. This is it. Then, Kaelin said quietly. This is where we end. He spread his wings and flew up toward the high ceiling of the throne room. For a moment, he was silhouetted against the 5 fire torches. A dark and terrible silhouette. Then he vanished, a shadow dissolving into the greater darkness. The healers worked through the night treating the wounded. The throne room was cleaned of blood and bodies. The Southland's generals were placed under guard, awaiting trial for treason. And Aislinn sat in her private chambers, alone, trying to process what had happened. Lyra found her staring out the window at the eternal night, as she had so many times before. He's gone, Aislinn said without turning around. Kaelin is gone. He'll never forgive me for this. He'll spend the rest of his life hating me. Perhaps, Lyra said gently. Or perhaps he'll spend the rest of his life understanding that what he felt wasn't love. It was need. And eventually, need fades. Aislinn turned from the window, and her expression was haunted. Did I do the right thing? She asked. Tell me honestly, Lyra. Did I do the right thing by choosing myself? By choosing Theron? Quote, I don't know, Lyra said. I don't think anyone can truly know if a choice is right until long after it's been made. But I know this. You chose with your eyes open. You understood the cost. And you chose anyway. That's all anyone can do. I've lost him, Aislinn said. I've lost my warlord, my protector, my... She stopped, unable to continue. Your friend, Lyra finished gently. You've lost your friend. And that loss is real. And it matters. But the Night Court will endure. We've endured worse things before. Aislinn sank into a chair. And for the first time in centuries, she looked truly vulnerable. What will happen to him? She asked. To Kaelin? Quote, Lyra thought about Kaelin's last words. The finality in his voice. She thought about the way he'd stopped his attack, even though he could have continued. She thought about the man beneath the warrior. The lonely creature who had loved so desperately and found no return. He'll survive, Lyra said. Men like Kaelin always survive. But he'll be changed by this. Smaller. Perhaps. More human. Less dangerous. And yes, eventually, that will be better for everyone. A month passed. The Night Court rebuilt itself with surprising resilience. The wounded healed. The rebels were tried and either exiled or accepted reduced positions with the understanding that treason would not be tolerated again. Kaelin did not return, but Lyra received a message from him, carried by a neutral party, a minor fie from one of the border territories. The message was simple, written in a script she recognized from centuries past. I'm going away for a time. I need to remember who I am without her. I need to become a man rather than a weapon. When I return, if I return, I hope you'll still be willing to try what we discussed. I hope you'll still be willing to choose love over duty. But I understand if you've moved on. I understand if I've lost that chance too. See. Lyra read the message 3 times before burning it. He's really gone, Theron said, appearing beside her. She hadn't heard him enter, but she'd learned that Dayburn Phi moved quietly. For how long, do you think? Quote, a long time, Lyra said. Years. Probably. He needs time to heal. And will you wait for him? Theron asked. There was no jealousy in his voice. Only curiosity. I don't know, Lyra said honestly. I've spent so long serving others that I'm not sure I know how to just live for myself. To wait for someone. To choose them. To make that kind of commitment. It frightens me more than it attracts me. Aislinn mentioned that you might step back from your role as her shadow, Theron said. She said you deserve to choose your own path. That you've earned the right to be a person, not just a function. Did she? Lyra looked at the Dayburn prince with new appreciation. She's a better woman than I give her credit for. She is, Theron agreed. But she's also had a lot of help. Your help. You kept her centered when she wanted to fall apart. You kept her honest when she wanted to hide behind her crown. You're a better friend to her than anyone I could ever be. He paused, then added, and for what it's worth, I think Kaelin is lucky that you love him at all. I think he doesn't quite realize it yet, but he will, eventually. 2 months after Kaelin's departure, Lyra made her announcement to Aislinn. She would remain in the Night Court, but not as the Queen's shadow. Instead, she would take on a new role. Keeper of the Archives, guardian of the Night Court's history and secrets. It would free her from constant attendance on the Queen, would allow her to have her own life, her own choices, her own future. Aislinn approved immediately. It's about time you chose for yourself, the Queen said, embracing her. I want to see you happy, Lyra. I want to see you become the person you could be if you stopped being defined by your duty to me. What if I can't? Lyra asked, voicing the fear she'd harbored for centuries. What if without that duty, I'm nothing? What if I've been a shadow for so long that I don't know how to be a person? Quote, then you'll learn, Aislinn said simply. One day at a time. One choice at a time. Until, eventually, you'll look back and realize you've become someone you actually like. Someone you actually choose to be. 1 year later, Lyra stood in the archives of the Night Court, shelving ancient texts and recording new ones. The work was meditative, peaceful. It allowed her to think, to process, to simply exist without the constant pressure of being responsible for someone else's safety. She'd taken a lover, a minor Phi from the East who worked as a healer. Their relationship was simple, uncomplicated, and ultimately not meant to be. When he left to travel to other courts, Lyra found she didn't grieve. Instead, she found relief in the knowledge that she could be happy alone, that she didn't need someone to complete her. It was in this state of peace that Kaelin returned. He came quietly, without fanfare or announcement. He simply appeared one night in the archives while Lyra was working by candlelight, looking for a particularly rare text. She felt his presence before she saw him. His magic had a signature she knew as well as her own, warm and dark and achingly familiar. Hello, Lyra, he said. She turned to face him, and her breath caught. He was changed. His hair was longer, braided with silver threads. His eyes were still that warm brown. His wings were still massive and dark. But there was something different in his demeanor, a quietness, a stillness, a sense of a man who had finally stopped raging against the universe. Kaelin, she said, and she was proud that her voice remained steady. You came back. I told you I would, he said. I told you I would wait for you. I told you I would try to become the kind of man you could love. He stepped closer. And this time Lyra didn't move away. I spent the year away, he said, learning how to be Kalen the man, not Kalen the warlord. I learned that my obsession with Aislinn was a way of avoiding myself. That I was so focused on winning her love that I never had to face the fact that I didn't particularly like myself. And now? Lyra asked. Now I like myself better, he said. I'm still a warrior. I still have rage inside me. But I've learned to carry it without letting it carry me. I've learned that strength doesn't have to mean violence. That power doesn't have to mean domination. He reached out and took her hand. And this time she let him. She felt the warmth of his touch, the realness of his presence. I've also learned, he continued, that I love you. Not because you're a replacement for Aislinn. Not because you're convenient or available. But because you're real. Because you're honest, because you challenge me to be better. I love you too, Lyra said. And the words felt like stepping into light after centuries in shadow. But I need you to understand something. I will not be your anchor. I will not be the woman who saves you from yourself. I will love you as an equal. As a choice I make every day. But I won't define myself around you. I know, Kalen said. And he smiled. A real, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. That's part of why I love you. They stood in the archives, surrounded by the history of the Night Court, by countless stories of love and loss and redemption. And in that moment, Lyra finally understood that she wasn't stepping into the light to escape the shadows. She was stepping into the light to become whole, to be both shadow and shine, both duty and desire, both the person she had been and the person she was choosing to become. 5 years later, the Nightfall Palace was decorated with flowers for a celebration. An unprecedented sight in the eternal darkness of the Night Court. Moonflowers bloomed along the corridors, their petals glowing softly in the darkness. Torches burned with fire that had been spelled to shimmer in rainbows, casting dancing lights across every stone surface. Aislinn stood in the throne room, no longer sitting upon her throne but walking freely among her people. She had changed in the 5 years since her union with Theron. She was softer now, less guarded, more willing to show her humanity. Theron stood beside her, his hand rarely leaving her back, and anyone could see that his love for her had only deepened with time. Kalen wore the formal armor of the Night Court's warlord, but his eyes were no longer filled with rage. He stood with Lyra, his hand intertwined with hers, and if there was any lingering sadness in his expression when he looked at Aislinn, it was muted now, transformed into something that resembled acceptance. Today, they were celebrating the birth of Aislinn and Theron's son, a child born with both Dayburn and Night Court magic, his skin shimmering with both gold and silver, his eyes reflecting the complexity of his parents' love. His name was Kieran, and he represented a new age for the magical realms. It's strange, Lyra whispered to Kalen as they watched the celebration. To see Aislinn so happy, so free. It's not strange, Kalen replied. It's right. This is what she should have been all along. A woman first, a queen second. Everything else follows from that. He squeezed her hand, and Lyra felt that familiar warmth, that sense of being exactly where she was meant to be. Do you regret it? She asked, accepting that she would never love you romantically? Choosing instead to serve her as warlord? Quote, every day, Kalen said. And when Lyra's hand stiffened in alarm, he laughed softly. Not because I still love her romantically. Because I regret the pain I caused her by being obsessed with her for so long. But if I hadn't gone through all that, if I hadn't been broken and desperate and eventually rebuilt myself, I never would have learned to love you the way I do now. So perhaps the regret is its own kind of gift. They stood together in the light of the celebration. Two people who had walked through shadow and emerged into something more complex, more beautiful, more real than either had ever imagined. The queen approached them, carrying her newborn son. My friends, Aislinn said. And she meant both words fully. I want you to meet the future of the Night Court and the Dayburn Realms. Kieran. This is Kaelin, my beloved warlord. And this is Lyra, my beloved friend. These two people have given me the freedom to become myself. Without them, none of this would exist. She placed Kieran in Lyra's arms, and the gray-haired Fae woman looked down at the child with wonder. He's beautiful, she whispered. He is, Aislinn agreed. And he will grow up knowing that love takes many forms, that loyalty and desire can coexist, that sometimes the greatest romances are not the ones between lovers, but between people who choose to stand beside each other despite everything. She placed a hand on Kaelin's shoulder, a gesture of affection and gratitude that would have once torn him apart with longing. Now, he simply smiled and placed his own hand over hers. The Night Court will be safe with him, Kaelin said. I will make sure of it. I know you will, Aislinn said. She turned to Lyra. And you will teach him the history of our people. You will teach him that power is nothing without wisdom, that strength is nothing without compassion, that a crown is merely a burden unless the person wearing it understands the weight of it. I will, Lyra promised. That night, Lyra and Kaelin returned to their shared chambers in the palace, a place they'd come to call home despite its grandeur. The chambers had once been cold and formal, but Lyra had slowly transformed them with color and warmth, with books and plants and things that suggested a life being lived rather than simply endured. Kaelin sat by the window, looking out at the eternal night, and Lyra moved to stand beside him. You're thinking about Kieran, she said. It wasn't a question. I'm thinking about the future, Kaelin said. About what this child will inherit. About whether the Night Court has truly learned to embrace peace, or whether we're simply waiting for the next conflict. That's a burden for another time, Lyra said gently. Tonight, we celebrate. Tonight, we rest. Tonight, we simply exist. She took his hand, and he turned from the window to face her. 5 years ago, he said. If someone had told me that I would end up here, content, at peace, loving a woman who loves me back, I would have called them a liar. I would have said it was impossible, that the universe didn't work that way. And now? Lyra asked. Now I think the universe works exactly that way, Kaelin said. It gives us chances. It breaks us and remakes us and gives us chances to become something better. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we take those chances. He pulled her close, and Lyra rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. They stood at the window together, shadow and light intertwined, looking out at the eternal darkness of the Night Court. And in that darkness, Lyra found no fear. Instead, she found home. Years would pass. The Night Court would face new challenges, new threats, new opportunities for growth. Kieran would grow up to be a wise and just ruler, beloved by both his courts. Aislinn and Theron would build a legacy of peace that would influence the magical realms for generations. And Lyra and Kaelin would grow old together. Though aging was a slow process for Fae, who measured lifespans in centuries, they would continue to work beside the queen, not as servants, but as partners. Lyra would become known as the keeper of memory, the woman who recorded history and ensured that future generations would understand the cost of peace. Kaelin would eventually step down as warlord, passing the position to a younger warrior. While remaining as an advisor and mentor, his obsession would transform into purpose, his rage into wisdom, and on quiet nights, when the palace was dark and still, they would remember the woman Lyra had been, the shadow, the servant, the woman who defined herself entirely through duty. They would remember the man Kaelin had been, the weapon, the obsessed lover, the warrior who knew no way to express himself except through violence. And they would be grateful that they had been broken, that they had suffered, that they had been given the chance to become something more. Because sometimes, that's what love is, not the absence of pain, but the choice to continue standing beside someone even when pain is inevitable. Not the promise that everything will be happy, but the commitment to face the darkness together, knowing that there is light enough in each other to illuminate the way. And in the eternal night of the night court, surrounded by shadows and stars, two souls finally found what they had been searching for all along. Not completion, not redemption, but home. The end.